Well, it's 6 o'clock, and we shall start the August 1st meeting of Humboldt County Planning Commission, and we will start with a salute to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And I'd ask the clerk to take a roll call, please.
Commissioner Levy,
Here.
Commissioner Newman,
Here.
Commissioner Morris,
Here.
Commissioner Bongio,
Here.
and Commissioner McCavour.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I would ask the director if there have been any modifications to the published agenda.
No modifications, no supplementals.
Hallelujah. And with that, we will move along to the approval of the action summary, which we used to call minutes. And those minutes are the minutes of the June 6th Planning Commission meeting. And has everyone had an opportunity to review those? And are there any corrections or edits or clarifications?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes, through the chair, I'd like to talk about under G2, that was the William Bortis parcel map subdivision. It's on page 5. The motion in there doesn't go into detail. It says approved with revisions. Is there a way that we can have any revised motions in the minutes or in the action summary so that it's easy for the layman or memory of council or of the commission looking back at these type of things to see exactly what was done?
I certainly think if these are ambiguous and they need some clarification, that's certainly something that needs to be done before we approve those. So maybe we need to throw this back to staff, and Mike, you can work with staff and give them your concerns.
Okay.
And we'll
And
have this.
specifically, you're suggesting that we articulate what the revisions were? Yeah.
Right, yeah, because, you know, with the ones that had no revision, you know, that were just the straight way, it's easy to see
Yeah.
what it was.
Right.
But with revisions.
Yeah. I think that's
instead of going another way of trying to look it up and do all sorts of gyrations to find out when you're going backwards and, or the public's looking at things, that it's easier to have it written right there.
Yeah, no, I agree, and honestly, it could be useful for us.
Right.
When we want to look back on, when a similar case comes up, we want to look back on what we did a year ago. What did we change in
Right.
improving that? So if that's, I would support that request.
Well, with that, then we will not take action on this tonight, and we will ask staff to provide some clarifying language with that and bring it back to us when they have done that. Thank you, Mike. And with that, we will move along to the public comment section of our agenda, which deals with items that are not on the agenda tonight. Anyone wishing to speak on items under our purview, which are basically land use items, and the item is not on tonight's agenda, you may approach the podium at this time and give us your comments, please. Anyone? Seeing no one, we'll close that section of public comment, and we will move along to the consent agenda. First item on the consent agenda is the Highway 36 Farms LLC and conditional use permit and special permit in the Dinsmore area. Is there anyone in the audience who's going to speak in opposition to staff recommendation, any of the commissioners, and who would like to have this item pulled for a full public hearing? Please give me the indication that you are so inclined. Seeing no one, that will stay on the consent. The next item on the consent is the Windy Gap LLC conditional use permit and special permit in the Alder Point Road area of Garberville. Is there anyone in the audience or any of the commissioners who would like to have this, or is going to speak in opposition to staff's recommendation and would like this pulled for a full public hearing? Anyone? See no one, that will remain on the consent. Item number 3 on the consent is the Heartstone Farms LLC and conditional use permit and special permit in the Bryceland area. Is there anyone in the audience or any of the commissioners who are going to speak in opposition to staff's recommendation and would like to have this item pulled for a full public hearing? Anyone? Seeing no one, that will stay on the consent. And under the continued public hearing, we have the Tony Elena parcel map subdivision in the McKinneyville area. Is there anyone in the audience going to speak in opposition to staff recommendation? Seeing a hand, that will go for a public hearing. And with that, then it looks like the consent agenda will consist of the Highway 36 Farms LLC conditional use permit and special permit, the Windy Gap LLC conditional use permit and special permit, the Heartstone Farms LLC conditional use permit and special permit, and that's it. So at this time, I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve consent agenda.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The consent agenda is unanimously approved. And with that, we will move along to the items listed under our continued public hearing, which is the Tony Elena parcel map subdivision in the McKinneyville area. And if we could get a staff report on that, I'd appreciate that.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Morris. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Trevor Estelo, the assigned planner on this project. The project before you tonight is a minor subdivision of approximately half-acre parcel into 3 parcels ranging in size from 5,000 square feet to roughly 6,200 square feet. The parcel is located northwest of the intersection of Hiller Road and McKinleyville Avenue. The parcel is currently vacant and will be served with community water and sewer provided by the McKinleyville Community Services District. The parcel was created by a lot line adjustment in 2005 and is accessed by a 20-foot wide encroachment onto Hiller Road, down here there. Pursuant to County Code Section 325-9, and the applicant has submitted an exception request for a reduced right-of-way to have the subdivision served by a 20-foot wide easement. The Department of Public Works has indicated they can support this request. The applicant has also submitted an additional exception request to eliminate sidewalks along the interior access roads. Public Works recommended sidewalks along the easterly road width of the roadway entering the subdivision. Just a couple photos of the site. This is Hiller Road looking easterly towards McKinleyville Avenue. The subject parcel fronts Hiller right where this telephone pole is. And this is basically the 20-foot wide flag pole that would access the lots in the back here. Public Works their recommendation was improving a sidewalk down to the northerly end of Lot 2. What would happen here is just, if you were to grant that exception, this would just be developed as an urban driveway standard, which would have a sidewalk wrap around the ramp here. So your commission may choose to accept, modify, or reject this exception. If your commission chooses to grant the exception to remove the sidewalk requirement, that should be added to your motion. Here's a copy of the tentative map. It's kind of hard to see, but it's basically 3 lots with this 20-foot access running down the westerly side here. Although the lot is relatively flat, it does slope slightly to the north, and in order to accommodate drainage beyond what would be detained in a stormwater detention facility, an easement across the parcel to the north will allow the drainage to be directed to McKinleyville Avenue. This is basically the location of a drainage easement acquired by the applicant to drain towards McKinleyville Avenue. Additionally, the applicant has demonstrated compliance with the MS4 permit, which applies to stormwater discharges from small municipal separate storm sewer systems, or MS4, and will be required to incorporate low-impact development techniques. Public Works has reviewed this proposal and will incorporate the design into the improvement plans. So with that, I should note there was a supplemental submitted, I think, when this first was being heard. It was in the original packet with a neighbor had some concerns with the exception request. So with that, I'll end my report and answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions or clarifications for staff before we go to the public comment section? No?
Actually, I just missed a couple of words, Mr. Eslo, when you just referred to the letter of concern from a neighbor. Was that in the staff reports, or?
I believe that was presented at a previous hearing.
That's right. That's what you said. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
So I just found it in the Public Work report. It says unnamed access road. It says not county maintained, but there's no roads that the county takes in anymore. So is it a PRD or is it just a private road, period?
I believe this would just be a private road.
Thank you.
Melanie?
Yeah, I received some questions from some members of the community regarding ADA compliance, and I would just like you to publicly address that. I assume that that wouldn't be an issue here. It's something that would have to be followed when this is all within the development process.
Correct. That would, I mean, the ADA requirements must be followed. There would be the ADA accessible or a sidewalk approach right at the frontage per the urban driveway design standards. So should sidewalks be installed in the future, they would connect to that sidewalk that would wrap around that walk.
Thank you.
Any other questions or clarifications? If not, we'll open it up for public comment. Anyone wishing to comment on this, please approach the podium at this time.
Good evening. My name is Mike O'Hearn. I'm a land surveyor with Kelly O'Hearn Associates, and I'm the agent for the owner. As Trevor mentioned, that there's really only one exception that we're requesting that Public Works didn't grant, and that's an exception from the requirement for a sidewalk. When people have flag lots, which is a common design on a cul-de-sac, there are two driveways that go back to two houses, and there's never a requirement for a sidewalk for two houses. This is three houses. I don't think it's that much different than two. I suppose there's a point where, 50 is too much, but I don't think three is that much more than two. And of course, part of the reason for not wanting a sidewalk is cost. It just adds cost to the lot. But really more important is the quality of life. If there's a 20-foot setback, and in this case there would be a 5-foot landscaping strip and a 5-foot sidewalk, half of the front yard is taken up by landscaping strip and sidewalk. And in a case like this, where there's really nobody to walk on the sidewalk except for the few people that live on this road, it just seems like there's not a need for the sidewalk. And I think people would prefer to have more grass in front of their house and not a sidewalk. And walking around McKinleyville, there are many situations like this that don't have sidewalks. Many of them are old, but there are some new ones. I walked around Central Estates, which is 2 blocks away from this property. And Central Estates is a planned development, so there are different conditions there and different conditions of approval. But I walked down Arbor Way, which is in Phase 2C that was recorded not too many years ago, and it's a small lot subdivision, portion of the subdivision, lots down to 2,500 square feet and up to 5,000 square feet. There are 18 lots on a street that has no sidewalk. And so for Mr. Elena, we're talking about 3 houses, 3 lots with no sidewalk, and in Central Estates, it was assumed that it would be adequate to not have sidewalks for 18 lots. So I don't think it's an unreasonable request, and we request that the commission approve the deletion of the sidewalks. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak, please approach the podium. Anyone? Seeing no one, we'll close this section of public comment and we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion. Commissioners?
I think this is a prime example of what we need to change in Humboldt County, this one-size-fits-all, sidewalks everywhere, everything has to be the same. We were having this discussion before the meeting, the director and I, and you go any place else and, well, I shouldn't say any place, but a lot of places, and you don't see sidewalks everywhere. New developments don't have them, and this one being 3 lots, it makes no sense to require that much sidewalk. The expense, creating more impervious surfaces so the water doesn't have some place to go. As long as the ADA issues are handled out at Hiller Road, I'd support the exception.
Noah?
I'll just say that I agree. I mean, in this case, I thought that Mr. O'Hearn made a pretty good case for why it's not only serving a very small potential number of users, but it's really changing the aesthetics, the drainage to some detriment. I'm always curious to hear the Public Works argument for why they were wanting it. I don't think we have anyone to speak to that tonight, but I tend to agree with Commissioner Bongio.
Melanie?
Well, I'm in favor of sidewalks generally, but as I brought up at a previous meeting, I'm not in favor of a one-size-fits-all sidewalk that has to be of concrete, interferes often with drainage, and introduces a lot of environmental impacts of its own. I do think it's important to have some sort of walking strip. I am not particular about what that might be, and I was very pleased to hear from Public Works that there isn't a stipulation that it has to be concrete. So I would like to see some sort of walking strip. I'm going on the assumption that these are going to be family homes, and I won't bring up all the references again. They're in a previous meeting if anyone wants them. But the number of accidents has gone up almost exponentially with the absence of sidewalks, and many places, for example, in Washington State and everywhere, they're realizing now that sidewalks of some sort, walking strips, let's call them, are really important for children and to increase the walkability of our neighborhoods, to reduce reliance on cars, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm not in favor of requiring a sidewalk, but I would like to see some kind of walking strip available for children and residents.
Okay. I got a couple of questions for staff. What's your estimate of daily traffic up and down this road? Has anyone made one, or what's the norm that you would use for residents?
I probably couldn't take a guess on Hiller Road. It's fairly busy road, I would think.
Okay. Well, maybe could the applicant have an answer to that, Mike?
I should have something to say, because I live on Hiller Road, but I'm never home during the day, so. Sure, Hiller Road is a collector road. It serves probably 50 parcels. There's never traffic, like a traffic jam. There's never.
Well, no, what wasn't Hiller Road? It's the private drive to the flag lots.
Okay, well, I think that they figure 8 trips a day maximum per residence, so that'd be 24 trips for 3 lots.
Okay. Thank you. And for staff, again, this is a private road. It is not a public road.
Correct, it's a private road easement.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So well, that exhausts my questions, and I think I'm somewhat in agreement with the comments I think the other commissioners made. Melanie, you had another comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just had a quick question. I noticed in the diagrams there is a walking strip, a grass strip there, and I was just wondering if that would stay.
is it in this photo here? Is this,
I believe it was in the photo showing the driveway. Yes,
oh,
that
this
one.
is, this is McKinleyville Avenue, so this is around the corner.
Oh, okay.
That's where the drainage,
So is
Easy.
there a walking strip, do you know? Where there is currently a sidewalk requirement?
no, this is where the sidewalk would be required is off Hiller going into the subdivision. So there is no sidewalk on either side of this, where this parcel fronts Hiller.
But that space would remain there.
That grass would be improved with a driveway approach.
So there is adequate space between the traffic and although it would be nice to have some kind of demarcation.
Yes, I think there's a sidewalk on the lot on the corner, and then the next lot is the one that is adjacent to this flag lot, and there's no sidewalk, but I think there's similar grass walkways in front of the fence before the curb.
Mike?
I just want to make sure I'm straight on what we're talking about here. We're not talking about eliminating this little driveway with the sidewalk ready to go in case the other ones get developed. Is that correct?
That is the idea, correct.
So it's going to have a sidewalk per se ready to go for that driveway entrance.
Correct, it would have this it would be developed to this urban driveway standard that has that wraparound sidewalk.
Right, okay, and all we're talking about for the exception of the other is for going back into the lots and in front of each of those parcels.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't see the need for it either.
Okay.
Right. And if I can just say, I mean, I appreciate Melanie's point about, and I tend to be, want to hold for the sidewalk requirement for, a relatively well-traveled access road. But this situation, as I understand it, feels to me almost more like a driveway, not a road. So it doesn't seem at all unreasonable, the exception request.
Any other discussion? Anyone ready for a motion?
Chair Morris,
Yes.
if it's the wishes of the commission to grant the exception, which seems to be the commission's intent, staff can provide some suggested wording for modifying the condition.
Okay.
You gonna tell us what that is?
Please, go ahead, go ahead.
So, through the chair, if you look at attachment 1, it's on page 11. Item 2 is the condition for public works requirements, and that is in Exhibit A. And what we would suggest you do in this particular condition is to insert the following wording. So I'll tell you when we're inserting. It's the conditions in the Department of Public Works referral dated May 2nd, 2018, included herein as Exhibit A of Attachment 1, as modifying Section 1.6B and 2.6C to remove the dedication and sidewalk improvement requirements shall be completed. Continue on with the sentence. That would be our suggested modification, and that hits those two areas of the Public Works exhibit that refer to the interior roads.
Okay, thank you.
Well, if nobody else will, I'll make the motion. I'm gonna let him regurgitate what he just said because I'm not gonna remember exactly how it is, but I'll adopt the mitigated negative declaration, make all the required findings for the approval of the parcel map subdivision, including the exception request to allow a reduced right-of-way based on evidence in the staff report and public testimony, and adopt the resolution approving the Elena project subject to recommended conditions with the added exception for interior sidewalks as staff recommended.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Everyone clear on the motion? Then we'll call for the question, and all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The exception, the subdivision is approved with that exception, and it was unanimous. And with that, we're moving along fairly quickly tonight. That brings us to items on the public hearing. And what we have listed for the next agenda item is the Humboldt County Planning Commission rules, procedural rules governing the conduct of all zoning and planning hearings before the Humboldt County Planning Commission. And with that, I would ask for a staff report on that, please.
Thank you, Chairman Morris and members of the commission. Michael Richardson with the Long Range Planning Staff. This item is for the commission's benefit. It is adoption of modification to the existing planning commission procedures. And ultimately, these are going to be reviewed by your commission. You're going to be approving a resolution that makes recommendations on them to the Board of Supervisors. And so the intent of tonight's hearing is to make sure we've got it right. The
Intent, I'm sorry, intent is what?
The intent of the meeting tonight is to make sure we've got the procedures right. Because ultimately, the Board of Supervisors will be taking action on them, and we want to make sure that they meet your commission's needs.
But this is an action item for a recommendation tonight, is that correct?
That's correct. So you'll be, if you like, you'll be approving a resolution which makes a recommendation for the board to approve these procedures, which would then govern your commission into the future. Your commission already has a set of planning commission rules and procedures, and I'll explain the differences between what's attached to the staff report and what's already in the planning commission procedures. But generally, these rules have 9 different sections. They first talk about the purpose and authority, and then they get into the general conduct of how the planning commission operates. They describe the order of business, how things are going to proceed through the agenda. It talks about how the planning commission conducts itself during an item that is being heard. It also talks about the rules governing the planning commission's actions and the voting. And then it describes the rules that apply to site visits that the planning commission may take and to ex parte contacts that the planning commission may have during the course of business. And then finally, it wraps up with a section on planning commission officers and duties. It's kind of the paperwork and the things. To briefly describe how these rules are different from what current practices and the current set of procedures that the planning commission operates under. Section 3 spells out, and that section is the general conduct section of the procedures. It spells out rules of conduct during public meetings, including standards of civil discourse, which are helpful to your commission if you have some unruly applicants or speakers. This section kind of lays out a procedure for you to continue to operate under those circumstances. Section 5.
Excuse me, Michael. Can I ask you a question on that? Is that not in the current way of doing things?
It's not as well described. That's right.
But it is in
It's
there.
it's very briefly described in the current procedures. It doesn't really give you rules of the road. These are intended to be rules of the road that you can operate to continue these meetings even in the face of unruly applicants or audience members. Section 5, which is the procedures for the conduct of public hearings, is somewhat different in that your current practice is to have the applicants speak first, and then and then you give them an opportunity to respond to public actually what you typically do is you invite the applicant to speak after all the public comment is provided. And what these rules would provide for is a two-step procedure for the applicant to address you first when the project is first presented to your commission, and then they get one rebuttal, if you could call it that, after all the public comment is completed. They would have an opportunity to come up and speak to that.
And if I could just interject, I thought that was a particularly helpful change that you're recommending, because as it stands, we don't usually hear them until the end, and it sort of puts them on the defensive instead of getting a chance to maybe allay certain concerns before people get up to express those concerns. So I think that would be very logical.
Okay. And another important difference is we are proposing that the conduct of the commission be governed by Rosenberg's Rules of Order as opposed to Robert's Rules of Order. And I'm going to rely on County Council to give you the more specifics about that. I'm not clear on what the differences between the two are. And then Section 7 talks about the voting and clarifies the effects of absenteeism, recusal, and that sort of thing. And it includes some case law and some examples, which are going to be helpful for your commission, I think. And then included there is discussion of what happens when the planning commission reaches a deadlock. And the effect of that is that it becomes in effect a denial, which is subject to appeal to the Board of Supervisors. Section 8, which is the site visits and ex parte communications, describes the intent behind those site visits and your communications with the applicants and the neighbors, and it formalizes current practice rather than changing it. And it makes it more available to the public. And then finally, the last two things are these procedures require 2 hours of ethics training, which are relevant to public officers. And then finally, Section 9D was added, planning commission or meeting agendas, which captures some of the intent of the Board of Supervisors when they launched us on this program to update your procedures. And so that explains how the differences play out in a nutshell, and I'm happy to answer your questions. County Council worked extensively on this, and so I'm sure they'll be assisting me with any responses or with any questions you have.
Okay. I think we will open up for public comment, and then we can get back and have our discussion with the County Council. So at this point in time, I will open this up for public comment. Anyone wishing to address this item in public comment, please approach the podium at this time.
Remember, only 3 minutes per person.
Anyone? Okay. Seeing no one, then we will close this section of public comment, and we'll bring it back to the commissioners, and now we can discuss with staff or ask questions and get some clarifications. Alan?
I'd like to know what the reasoning this came up now. I've been around here for about 6 years, and we've never talked about this before, other than when we've had questions that we've directed towards council. So I'm just curious, what sparked this? It'd help me understand why we're doing it better.
It's probably because at one point I went looking to see if we had commission procedures or rules, and there was kind of a loosely assembled packet of things that we give to new commissioners, but it didn't really include, how to perform the planning commission function in the meeting and pull everything together into one place. And so that's the simple impetus of it.
So, as far as placing it on the agenda, you are the one who totally placed it on the agenda?
Yes, and if I were to tell you the absolute truth about why it's on the agenda tonight, we saw that tonight's agenda was extremely light, and that this, we felt, was near enough to being complete to give it to you for review, so that we would honor a promise, a commitment that we had made to have at least 5 things on the agenda.
Okay. Alan? Go ahead.
I had a second question, and this may, I've been on a lot of boards and such, and I've never even heard of this new Rosenberg's Rules of Order. Everybody that I've ever talked with it always talks about Robert's Rules of Order, so I'm really curious where this came from. I mean, I should probably know about it, but it's really seems strange to me when I asked a few people around, and nobody's uses it around here as far as I can tell.
If I may, that was a suggestion that came up through our office because it is much more user-friendly than Robert's Rules of Order. If you look, it's much shorter. It's sort of a condensed version of Robert's. They're somewhat complementary. But we'd been talking about how Roberts is kind of ideal for a larger governing body, but doesn't always fit a small governing body. And so we thought that Rosenberg's might be a nice option for you. Not that you have to choose that. You could still rely on Roberts, but we thought for us it was easier to understand and digest.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
I do have a question. Insofar as we're commenting on the rules of order, I agree Rosenberg's is probably best for a smaller group. Typically, a large department, for example, at a university might use Robert's Rules of Order, but a very small one might use Rosenberg's. I have a question regarding the use of materials by commissioners. So there have been a couple of occasions where I won't say wanted, but I would have liked to have been able to put something up on the screen, for example, to illustrate a point I was making or a reference or a map. And I wasn't sure of the protocol, whether I should be emailing it to staff and then, when is that timed, who loads it up. And so I would really like to hear a little bit on, from staff on what you think of that and what the best way to go about that might be.
I think you perfectly articulated the correct approach, is that if there's something you're going to want to talk about and that would be aided by having an exhibit on the screen, to let us know, and we will include that image within the presentation or within the materials we have available.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And does that need to go in this, or?
I don't think it does.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
Mike?
So I had a question. I was looking up the Rosenberg's Rule of Order, and there was a couple of things in the notes, and one of them was about abstentions don't count in vote tally, and a tie vote fails to pass. Is that the same as Roberts, or is that different?
My understanding from I don't know. Roberts, we did have this issue come up, and I relied on case law, and it didn't specifically reference Roberts' Rules of Order. I didn't find that point explicit in Roberts, so it is actually helpful to have those notes. We relied on case law and an attorney general opinion in that situation when we had an abstention that affected the quorum. And we have addressed that specifically in these rules because it is a tricky issue under the law, so we tried to make it explicit here. And I think that that's consistent with what that note says. We can look at that more closely too.
What note?
With the note that you just read. And I think what we have proposed in the proposed rules regarding abstentions is consistent with what you just read.
Well, yes, it's part of the Rosenberg's Rule of Order. And it also includes recusal, publicly stating reason for recusal, and leaving room during debate and vote. Is that the same? I thought that was Robert's Rules of Order as well. Right?
That might be. I'm not 100% sure. And it's also reflected in these rules that are proposed.
How much time did this take to put together?
It was probably, the initial draft was close to 8 hours of staff time, and then county council took a look at it and did some research, and I'm not exactly sure how long they did their work, and then putting together the staff report was another hour or two.
And I thought we had a lot of permits backed up and stuff. I was surprised I didn't see much here on the agenda with permitting and everything going forward. I thought we were trying to get those moved through. Is there a reason that we don't have a lot on tonight's agenda for the 1st of August here? You know, to try and keep things moving along there?
Yeah. We have a lot of permits in the queue, but we also have a lot of permits that are waiting on information to be able to come forward. And so it's not that we have a lot of complete permits that are waiting for staff to get to them. In fact, I know in the cannabis realm, the struggle is finding permits that are ready, that are complete enough to bring forward.
Okay, thank you.
No, and then we'll come back to Melanie.
Yeah, I just wanted to get a little bit of clarification on Rosenberg's rules as well, which I was not familiar with. One small suggestion, I initially was confused because there's a reference to Section 6 in the staff report, and I noticed that in the draft Planning Commission rules here, you have the table of contents that number the sections, but those section headers don't actually have the number, so I would simply suggest that you put those numbers 1 in front of purpose, etc. That just would be a little helpful. But so the reference to Rosenberg's Rules of Order was to Section 6. I just wanted to ask then, and I regret that I did not have a chance to look this up independently, did you, in drafting this, essentially reproduce Rosenberg's Rules of Order in their entirety in this Section 6 Rules for Action by Motion, or are they adapted from Rosenberg's Rules of Order? Is there more to Rosenberg's Rules of Order that's not contained here, I guess, is what I'm wondering.
And I'm going to defer to county council on that.
So what part of what we did when looking at the rules was look at what other jurisdictions were doing, and this is actually kind of a combination from other jurisdictions for their commissions. And the reference to Rosenberg's is not all of the Rosenberg's Rules of Order are contained in here, is my understanding. I'm not extraordinarily familiar with them yet, but that will be something that I'll be doing as well,
Sure.
if you adopt these, if the board does.
Well, and I just wanted to add that I think it, I don't see anything in here that I take issue with, and in fact, a number of things that clarify procedures that I have been personally unclear on and that I think we have not, as a body, always been totally clear on. So I think it would be good for us to, practice reading these and practice using them. I mean, I would note that there are a couple of things under the various actions by motion that we haven't done. There's this item E, the previous question. I'm not saying that we often would need this, but it's interesting that there's this motion, as I understand it, to sort of cut off discussion. Is that what it's about? And it requires a 2/3 vote. This just jumped out at me because it specifically requires 2/3 vote. And I think that there's a few other formal motions that this is proposing we might take that, in the interest of conducting ourselves like a more professional body, we can try to practice applying them. So,
Melanie?
I just wanted to address Commissioner Newman's question regarding the abstentions. And Robert's Rules of Order also does state that someone who's abstaining counts towards quorum, but not towards the vote. And so that doesn't represent a change. And so, for example, a couple of months back, you might remember Commissioner O'Neill abstained, recused herself for one of the projects located in that district and went outside and waited and then came back in. That remains the same. And I don't know if it might be helpful, but there is a site if you wanted to pull it up. Rosenberg was a superior judge in Yolo County, and there's a whole site dedicated to it, and it's laid out quite well. It's www.cacities.org/resources/open-government/Rosenberg text_2011. It just might be good to pull it up for the other commissioners to take a look at.
yeah, I was actually just looking at the link to that here, but I'm not getting it to open.
www.ca.cities.org.
Yeah, and then resources.
That slash is the wrong way, though.
And then another slash, and then open-government. Not an underscore. My eyesight might be to blame here, but it looks like an underscore. It's open-government.
Okay.
And then /Rosenberg text _ Slash is the other way still. If you go back, the slash is still going the other way. No. Other way. Same way as all the previous ones. There we go. Rosenberg text _ 2011 .aspx SPX.
Well, maybe, Melanie, maybe instead of us taking the time to do that, maybe you could just, if you've got some concern, maybe you could verbalize those and we could all participate that way, if he's having trouble getting on the computer there.
It's kind of strange. If you just enter in the search bar in your search engine, Robert's Rules, abstention, quorum, Rosenberg.
You must have some secret clearance.
It'll probably pop up. If you put Robert's Rules of Order, Rosenberg, quorum, abstention, those kinds of keywords.
It appears to be a Humboldt County specific issue where it's denying me access to outside
Oh,
the county.
you just can't access the internet at all.
I'm not exactly sure what the issue is.
We're probably limited to the number of sites we can get to from this particular computer.
Oh, this is California City's Superior Court site.
Chairman, if I could ask a question. The supervisors, are they under Robert's Rules of Order right now? Or Rosenberg?
I don't know that they have formally adopted, and I think that we default to Roberts just out of practice, but I don't think that they formally adopted rules of procedure either.
Yeah. Well, I don't see a need to change from what we've got. It's all in Roberts. I'm looking at Roberts here. There's the previous question, ability right there. You know, it's all right there. Maybe if we had a Roberts Rules of Order cheat sheet to go through. I'm looking at one here online that would be good to have. Probably supervisors could use that as well. I don't see a need to make any changes.
Well, I've taken a look at this, and I guess my concern on this particular item is that you go through this 11 pages, changes that what I've heard basically has taken at least 2 days of staff time and staff resources to come up with this. We've got, I don't know, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000+ permits somewhere in the process. And what this document is, as far as I can tell, it's almost a redundancy of kind of what we've got to begin with here. And you read through this 11 pages, and right at the end it says, "No action of the Planning Commission shall be reversed by failure to follow these." So if that's the case, we put a lot of efforts, a lot of energies, and a lot of resources into something that doesn't mean much. And we also have, the procedures that I guess were in effect in 1998, which I think we default to Robert's Rules of Orders. And I think part of the problem that I've always had with a lot of the items that come before us is they're complex. They are somewhat chaotic. And I don't think that this document doesn't diminish that. It just gives another layer that we need to adhere to. This document goes through a bunch of items that we already required to do by state law. I believe that's ethics training, filing in Form 700. We're subject to the Brown Act. The 1998 says we already default to Robert's Rules of Order if there's a problem. And so I think that getting this item before us is not a very good use of staff resources, particularly because of the hole that we are in with our backlog of applications. And I think by approving this, I'm not in favor of this. I think we have in place, and we have in motion, and we've operated with our current or historical practice, and I do not believe that something like this adds anything to where we are or how we've operated. And that's kind of my take on it, and I'm not in favor of this. Noah?
Well, with respect, I think I take a different view from the chair. First of all, I don't get the sense that, 8 hours of staff time drafting this was a huge commitment of resources, and I doubt that it has set back or held up the progress on other items. In fact, if I understood the director, he was saying that they decided to get this together because for other reasons of not having information or steps followed, that those other permits weren't ready to bring to us. But more to the point, I think this largely codifies what we've been doing, but puts it all in one place and articulates it. And I personally find that useful because I don't recall getting anything to look at, to read, to study when I first came on. I had served on other boards that followed similar procedures, so I guess I had some background in it, but I think it's useful for a new commissioner to be able to read a 10-page document or whatever it is that spells out, here are all the things that you need to know, and have them all in one place. I think, Mr. Richardson said that there isn't a great deal in here that has changed, but he did walk us through a few points, or the staff report walked us through a few points where they are proposing incrementally different procedures, which to my mind all make sense. The rest of them are pretty much codifying what we've been following. I didn't see any place where this is proposing something that is fundamentally different from Robert's Rules of Order in any way that we're actually practicing. I did find a kind of handy thing just now that compares Rosenberg's and Robert's. So I don't see that that's changing what we're doing so much as leaving out some of the extraneous stuff that we're not following. So, I personally appreciate this, and I support it.
Yeah, I mean, as one of the more recently appointed commissioners, I too have served on other boards and commissions, and it's always nice to have something written down for new people, and even for the public. I think it helps towards transparency to have something out there that the public can read through that is more accessible. And Rosenberg's Rules of Order is more accessible in terms of the public understanding the process, which does, of course, make it more transparent. Likewise, I don't necessarily see that it's the same staff that would be working on the cannabis projects that would be working on something like this, and so I don't really see that as an issue. I know that we're a relatively small county, so people can work on whatever is an emergency that week, but I too appreciate the effort, and I don't mind having the simpler version of Robert's Rules, or basically the same thing, very few minor differences. In terms of the ex parte communications, it might be nice to have a little bit of language in there just to remind people that the communication should be neutrally stated without, you have to state the reason, obviously, as to why you are recusing yourself or abstaining, but it's often tempting or maybe difficult to avoid deliberating at the same time. And I've run into this before, both as a observer and participant, and so it might be nice to have a little bit of language in there that might remind people to just state the reason neutrally without giving too much information.
If I may just, I want to make sure I'm understanding Commissioner McCavor's last point. You're saying that in stating that one is recusing from a topic, it's sometimes difficult or tempting to say something that indicates that you're in favor of it. Is that what you mean, or indicates that you're opposed? I mean, I presume it would be more likely that you have a stake in it, so you're in favor of it, and that's what we should avoid?
Well, that certainly could be a reason as to why somebody might want to recuse or abstain. They might have some kind of financial incentive or involvement. There are also cases where you might be a nearby resident. So, for example, if you live within 300 meters of a project, you might want to recuse yourself, and then you would want to be, for example, careful to just state the reasons, the distance, and not get into whether or not you're for or against the project, or even get into the weeds on that, like, well, I'm in favor of it or I'm not in favor of it. That's not why I'm recusing myself, simply because I'm within 300 meters. That can come up rather often.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of nice to have that reminder that you just stick to the actual reason for the recusal and not get into those sorts of deliberations and opinions.
So the essence of what you're suggesting is make sure that you don't give any opinion pro or con with regard to the project, just your reason for recusal. What?
Yes, during the recusal itself, which surprisingly, or not surprisingly, is often the case. It's often hard not to.
Sure.
Alan?
This might be a time for council to step in, but I believe if you're talking about the issue of recusal, if you are recusing to be involved in that action, you need to leave the room, because you can influence your fellow members, whether you say anything, just like me looking at you going, or, that. So you need, if it's recusal, you need to leave the room until it's over with.
That's correct. I was referring to when you state that you are recusing yourself, which is required. It's.
Then you should get up and leave the room, right?
Well, you state why you're recusing yourself.
Yeah.
And so I was just pointing out that it might be nice to have some language in there that just simply says that the reason should be stated neutrally without bias or any reason given as to why your opinion, or as to what your opinion is on the project, just that you are recusing yourself for the following legitimate reason or required reason.
If I remember right, in the ethics class that we are required to take, I believe that recusal, abstention, and ex parte communication is covered in that, and that all of us are required to take, and I think update every 2 years, I believe it is. There's an updating requirement in there, and I think all of that is already required by state law, and we've already are obligated to make ourselves aware of that. And so a lot of that information is available, and we have been exposed to it, and hopefully we learn from it.
I agree with that, Chair. But I also think it is nice for the public and for newer commissioners to have it all kind of in one place, because sometimes other people don't even know that they need to be following, for example, the FPCC, or the public might not be aware of those things.
So
Noah?
if I may just return to the fine point that Commissioner McCavour made. So you're talking about the part of the text that is on the top of page 9 of the staff report, I think, where under conflicts of interest, where it does specify the steps for recusal, including the requirement to leave the room. But first is to publicly state the nature of the conflict of interest in sufficient detail to be understood by the public. And I do think it's important to give a reason and not just say I'm recused, because I've seen that done, and it just sort of leaves people wondering, and it almost can can impute an air of scandal or something when there's not one. But giving the reason, and you're suggesting, Melanie, that to that section 1 under conflicts of interest, that we just add a few words that would say, but ensuring to not indicate a bias in favor or against the project, something like that?
Exactly. For transparency, it would be nice to have some language in there that says the reason for the recusal should be stated in terms of, the simple legal requirement for recusal. But that no opinion or bias should be included in that statement of reason.
Well, that seems reasonable to me.
Any other discussions, comments? Anyone? Go ahead, Alan.
I'll make one last comment. It just seems like what we've been doing has worked this long. I'm not sure that we need to, it's good to have some discussion, but I don't know that we need to change anything. I mean, I can only think of a couple instances in all the time that we've been here, that we've had issues, and it hasn't been, I don't think, on this end. We may have asked for some clarification from council, but we've had a few speakers that were out of line that, had to be asked to stop, but I don't think there's been that big of a problem. I can only think of 2, so.
I agree with Commissioner Bongio. I think that there's not a lot of substance here. It's not that substantive, but I think the intent is not so much that there'd be some substantive changes, but that there is something publicly available. Not only for the, in my opinion, it's more valuable for the public than it is for the commissioners, new or old.
Yeah, I would just say I don't disagree with Commissioner Bongio either. I think we've gotten along just fine. But I think it's correct that it's good for the public to see that there are a set of procedures and that they're not just being kind of felt out or doing whatever the chair feels like. And I feel like in case there were a situation that something happens that feels wrong, feels that it might go against our common practices, maybe we have a different chair and they suddenly change things up, this is a good backstop. So bottom line is, it's not that I'm going to make a strong case for why this was needed, but having had it, I think it can serve a purpose, and I see no reason that I would oppose it.
Could maybe we publish something that we have at the front for the public to read, or something that says, if you want to know more about the Robert's rules or Rosenberg's rules, or, go to this website, or have something that is there for them. It's all out there. People that really care about it know how to research it and where to go. You hear people get up and say it, that I'm going to check with this or that, so they know about it. But for those that don't, maybe there could be something there, a service to them, where to ask the question.
So it's a great question, but I would submit to you, rather than referring to something else for people to look at and interpret on their own, because the thing that will happen is they will look at it and interpret it according to what they want to find in it. It's good to have something that the commission universally agrees, nope, this is how we do business. And that also tells the public, this is how we do business. And so then it's universally agreed upon. It's not some external thing that we refer to. It's, this is ours, this is what we do.
Well, I would, the way this is written and presented, I would take a little exception to that, because what this is a mixture of stuff that's required by state law that we have to do, no matter what. And so you're going to get someone in the public, they're gonna look at this, and, well, that's state law, well, they're required to do this. And at the very end of this, there's a sentence that says, "No action of the planning commission will be reversed by failure to follow these rules." And so what you've got is you've got mixture of some state law that you have to follow, that's in here, and then you've got a bunch of stuff in here that, well, it's guidance or it's guidelines or it's something that we ought to do to clarify stuff. But you are not required to follow all those. You're required to follow state law. The rest of the stuff in here, we're not required to follow, and that's what it says at the end of here.
Well, I would maybe ask county council to respond more formally to this, since it will be an attorney and not a planner responding to the statement. But I think that statement's in there not so that it says that it doesn't matter if they're followed or not, but so that people don't use the misstep within these procedures as a reason to overturn a project.
Right.
I think it is intended that these are followed. It is intended that they're adhered to. But if for some reason something happens and just a step is forgotten, that's not a reason, unless it deprives the public of meaningful input, to dismiss the action by the Planning Commission or the Board of Supervisors.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement. It's to give a little bit of flexibility, because we understand that when you're applying the rules, you're not going to always be able to do it to the letter of what's here, even though that might be the intent. They're supposed to be tools that you can use, but we know the meetings happen and things are going fast and you can't always do exactly these things. So it's a protective measure, and to do the best that one could to follow the rules, but to maintain the decision of the commission and to not have them be overturned and to not create undue layers of process around that. But the state law would still be something that would need to be followed.
But the perception that I get, if I was the public, and when I first read this, until I got to the end of it, I would say that, that this is what you have to do. And if you don't do it, then there's ramifications for it. But what you're saying and what it says at the end of it, there's really not, other than state law. There's ramifications if you don't follow state law. But the rest of the stuff, if you make a misstep, there's no ramifications for it. That's what it says to me.
Well, I would, if I could, just to...
You can take exception, go right ahead.
Well, I'm not taking exception. I appreciate the dialogue, frankly, and I am proud to watch the commission deliberate on this tonight. It's nice to see that this has spawned some deep thinking. But one of the things that, I note in here is that one of the procedures that I would often like to see is that after the public speaks, I would like to have it turned back over to staff to respond to things that the chair, or that so that the staff can, or that the chair turns it back over to staff to address things that the public has brought up. Because there may be things that we want to get on the record that have been unresponded to. And they may be things that the commission may not realize they need to ask about. And so from a staff perspective, I may catch you and say, hey, can we respond to that? And so you allow us to respond to it, but that's not written specifically in the rules. The rules say that after the public hearing, it goes back to the commission to deliberate. But you gave staff an opportunity to respond to things. And certainly that caveat at the end is just to also give you a little bit of flexibility there, that if you step outside of those strict rules to address things that are very important, that's not a reason to overturn a project.
Well, I think that's how we operate. I mean, if there's a question or confusion or something needs clarification, once we get, we'll do that with the initial staff presentation. And after the public hearing, after the applicant spoke, if we have question or clarification, we'll either ask staff or we will ask the applicant to come back up and clarify if staff can. I think that's kind of our standard operating procedure. I don't see why it need, why it's a problem that needs codification. Melanie?
I see it actually as a protection for the chair of the commission insofar as, for example, the chair might, on a certain day forget to tell the applicant that they're able to come back up again, let's say. I don't think you've ever done that, but let's say that happened. I think that language is in there just to say, well, look, maybe one step got skipped, or you didn't, that day ask the applicant twice if they needed to, or they wanted to come back up. That can't be used as a way to say, well, the decision is not valid.
Well, the applicant coming up twice, that is not necessarily required under the public comment. Everyone gets a chance to speak. And after the public comment is closed, if we have questions, be it of staff or questions on the project that staff can't answer, then the next logical step is to ask the applicant to come back up. If we have a procedure of the applicant gets to make a presentation, and then he comes back in at the tail end and makes a presentation, part of what I believe are, my position is to efficiently carry out these different projects before us so that the public is heard, there's transparency, and we move along in an efficient and effective manner. And again, I'm going back to the backlog. There's a heck of a lot of projects that at some point in time we're going to get hammered on. And so if we have a procedure that says a certain individual gets to talk more than once, you're extending this on. Unless the second ability to come and to the mic is at the request of a commissioner or to handle a question. If there's no questions and everything's crystal clear, we don't need to take another 3 minutes or 5 minutes on some of the stuff and just add to the process. If you've got 4 or 5 or 6 projects before you during a meeting, next thing you know, you're looking at 15, 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes by the time you go back through some of these procedurally mandated steps that we've got down here. Each project is different. It's kind of like the Public Works is one sidewalk philosophy fits all. I could use that same scenario on these different projects. I don't believe that other than the state mandated procedures that we have, we need to obligate ourselves to something that may not be necessary unless the chairman or the commissioners requested that there's additional input required.
I agree with that, what you're saying there, but it's a bit of a different point. So I was just pointing out that language there at the end was to sort of preempt people who might be kind of grasping at straws and saying, oh, well, I think, the chair didn't follow this particular sequence or didn't ask so-and-so if they had a question or what have you. And this could be true whether the substantive elements that you're talking about are in there or not. So, we could, it's within our purview to pare that down. We could request that staff just leave it all very open-ended and say, well, it's up to the commission to decide how many times the applicant gets to speak. We could could request all of those changes, but that little bit at the end would still be there just to protect, especially the chair, but to protect the commission in case somebody is unhappy with our decision and says, oh, well, maybe, they didn't cross their T's or dot their I's. I think that's all that is at the end. But I think it's good to discuss the more substantive elements in here. And you brought up, we both brought up the one that is one of the more substantive changes, which is the applicant speaking. So I think that is something we should probably talk about.
Director?
I'd just like to ask, I clearly hear what you're saying. And one of the things that I'd just simply ask is it having any kind of written format at all that's objectionable? Or if it were structured rather than being rules, to use a different language? We don't want them to be, as you put it, not make any difference, not mean anything. Certainly they mean something. But obviously, if they were written so that, yep, we all agree that this is what we do, but if in the discretion of the chair, there is reason to do something a little different, you know, as long as it's not completely going out of bounds, there is that clear flexibility there. And it's up to the chair to really run the meeting in an efficient and effective way. And I think one of the things, and I've been debating whether I should say this because I don't want to pull your leg at all, but we're blessed with a very strong chair here. And so I think things do work well because we have a very, very good chair. But it may be that someday when, God forbid it's too soon, that our chair is not here, that the person following in those footsteps would benefit from having clear guidance.
Well, I will go back to my original point that I started with, is that I'm kind of a believer, if it's not broke, don't try and fix it. And what we have here is a document that spent 2 man-day resources, monies, time, efforts of the planning department. And in this document, there's a bunch of stuff that's state law we're going to do anyway. And I can see this here, if we codify this and basically say we're going to stand by this, just like we had back in December. We get a person from the public, jump up, start yelling, points of order, points of order, points of order. We're just trying to have an efficient meeting go through. Does that mean we're going to have a parliamentarian on staff so that if someone brings up this point of order, before we go any further, we're going to have to get some kind of clarification? Because that's kind of what this document kind of alludes to. The fact that you've now got these rules of orders, you've now got this procedure, and I think it's not necessary, and I think it was not a good use of planning department staff time to put this matter before us.
I'm somewhat agreeing with what you have to say. What I am going to say is I don't think we have any real problems, so why do we need to change things? We do have a strong chair. We also have a strong director. We have better legal counsel than I've seen in the past. We have planners that are doing their job better than I would say in the past. So I think everything is working. And I don't think you have to go back if you want to see what I'm talking about and look not too many years ago at previous directors and how they ran things and worked with the chair, and it was orchestrated. We don't have that going on. I think things are very open. I think the public feels that way. I've had the public talk to me about that issue. So I don't see that there's a problem. Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't see it. I think Bob does a great job running the meetings. I've seen him be very willing to change in the middle of things if there's somebody that he really feels like, or if a commissioner asks and, lets them come up a second time or whatever. I just think that we're beating a dead horse here. That we're wasting time.
Noah?
Well, it's paradoxical, Bob, that I'm disagreeing with you, I think, on this item, because in fact, I see this item as enshrining and really almost ratifying and putting down on paper the excellent practices that you have followed. I mean, you and I have disagreed on substance on many issues, but I have not once disagreed or taken issue with or felt any criticism of your conduct as a chair. It really is a tribute to you that we have been going, that we get along as smoothly as we do. But I was going to speak up to Director Ford's point, which is that, you know, you won't be chair forever. None of us are going to be on the commission forever. And I've seen other bodies that operate quite differently with a different chair. And I think somebody else who came in with a bit of a chip on their shoulder or just didn't play well with others or whatever might assume that they had the discretion to do away with some of those things, and it would be to the detriment of the body. So I, you know, the time that was put into it, I take your point, but that's kind of water under the bridge now. I would like to get down to the question of, are there things in this that we have concerns about specifically adopting? I looked up the point about the applicant having an additional 3 minutes. You know, I take your point. I think the efficiency of these meetings is really critical, but as I read that section on top of page 10, it actually is suggested that that should be done, but in the discretion of the chair, time limits may be further limited or adjusted. So I don't believe it puts the requirements that the applicant speak twice, or that they would be entitled automatically. You know, if we're in a situation where time doesn't warrant that, you can always say, I don't think there's any need for it. But as I said early in the discussion during Michael's presentation, I think it actually could help the efficiency of our of the meetings to have this. This says that the applicant would come speak first. The way I see it, we've had many meetings where we got 12 people or 20 people who were concerned about something come up and say what their concerns are, and then we finally hear from the applicant and he says, well, actually, half of those issues, they've been resolved, they're going away. So that, to me, suggests that this might be, following these procedures might ultimately be more efficient. But, you know, just to come back to my original point, while I'm inclined to support this, I really do respect your opinion on this since you are the chair. and I want to understand specifically if there are things in here that you think maybe we should throw out or alter, because I have a lot of respect for how you've conducted this body.
Melanie?
Yeah, so the reason I brought up that point, which then we ended up discussing, is because it is one of the very few changes, that having the applicant speak twice. But in fact, it's something that you often do anyway, and there is flexible language in there. And so, like I said earlier, I see this whole thing as not very substantive. It's just basically a document that puts into language what you already do really, really well. And I agree with that. I think you're an excellent chair, and I certainly hope you're not going anywhere. And I don't think anyone is thinking that. To be perfectly honest, I don't think this is about us. I don't think it's about you. I think it's about giving the public a transparent document. We have a major wind project coming up that had to be delayed because there's just so much public comment. And I think that it would be good to have something out there for those, you know, we have some big meetings coming up, even if we didn't. I think it's just good to have it written down what we and I see this as what we already do. I'm fine with changing it back to Robert's Rules of Order. I don't really care either way. Mm-hmm. I don't see anything really substantive in here. And so, yeah, I see it as a compliment to the great job that you do, in that it really does just put into writing exactly what we already do, pretty much word for word, step by step. But as Commissioner Levy said, I would be interested in hearing, you know, your opinion on some of those substantive elements in terms of whether they should be included or the language should be more flexible.
Well, you know, again, you know, I keep beating a dead horse here, but to me, this is redundant. And you know, this is just another 12 pages of bureaucratic language that is either already done or the 1998 handbook that's referred to in here is already in place. When this first came, you know, like I say, this is extra work that staff did. The Planning Commission historically has met one Thursday a week. Excuse me, a month. There's only one Thursday in a week, so one Thursday
That's right.
a month. For the last, I want to say, about 3 years, we have met 2 meetings a month because we have this huge backlog. And here we've already spent half a meeting on this item right here. Plus the staff has spent, in my opinion, at least 2 man-day resources on this. And that's not an efficient use of staff time. I don't believe it's an efficient use of the commission's time when we have this huge 1,000 application backlog. We need to get applications in front of us, not something that basically is redundant, that basically kind of recites state law, and then at the end it says, if you don't follow it, no big deal. I mean, that is, not efficient use of resources. It's not an efficient use of this commission time. Discussion
Well-
items?
Yeah, I was going to see if I should just make a motion. Or are we ready to, in the interest of not spending more commission time on this, and again, with all due respect to the concerns voiced by at least a couple of my fellow commissioners, I would like to move, I'm actually looking for the language. Is there a particular,
It's right here.
sorry. Thank you, sir. I would like to move that we find this project exempt from environmental review and make all of the required findings based on evidence in the staff report and public testimony and our discussion, and recommend that the Board of Supervisors approve the Humboldt County Planning Commission rules as attached, with 2 very distinct suggested changes. One, adding section numbers to the sections within that document which were absent, and 2, to attach the phrase suggested by Commissioner McCavour regarding the language to be used in the event of a commissioner's recusal.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Thank you.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Is everyone clear on the motion? Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, we'll call for the question. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
No.
Motion does not pass. Anyone wish to try an alternate motion?
I would make a motion that we just stay with what has been working, in my opinion, and at any time that staff has a single idea, or like Noah had a single idea, Melanie had a single idea, we just address those ideas and just incorporate them into what we already do, and I think we've been doing a pretty good job of, and not try to overthink this and just do what's working.
So, and I'm coming around to that point of view, if that's how we're going to go do it, sort of like an unwritten constitution, like they follow in Britain, like you sort of develop the procedures organically, and ultimately it's the sense of the body, is that what we do or not? Is that kind of what you're...
Pretty much. This is just a piece of paper. What really works is the integrity of the people up here and the people that are working here, and the staff, the public also getting up and saying what they have to say with respect, and doing it under the rules that they're given to do it. And we seem to do, with very few exceptions, we seem to do very well at that. So
Sure.
I just think that, if there's something that would make your guys' job better, then bring it up to the chair. I've seen you do it, so I don't think we have to have some new procedure to just make a little tweak that will make the meetings better.
Well, and if I can just add, I want to be clear that my supporting this has nothing to do with wanting to change or criticize Bob or any of us or how we've been doing things. It's maybe more just my like Virgo nature, liking to have it written down somewhere to refer to in case it comes up. But and a concern that one day we might have a different body or a different chair and things might not work as smoothly. But I think you would say, well, if it does get broke, then we'll fix it when and if that happens. But meanwhile, we can hope that we can essentially embody and demonstrate and pass along a set of procedures that have been working very well. And I agree that they have. So.
I've already said this too, but I think everything's working very well. I don't see anything really of substance in here. So as I mentioned, I do see it as something that might be valuable to have for the public, though, for transparency and for perception of bias. And so I understand where the staff is coming from on this. So I see both sides. The staff wanting to have, for example, it written down that the chair then goes back to the staff as an established rule of order. I see that as something that would eliminate from the public perception point of view as, oh, okay, well, the chair's going to let the staff get in on this, even though we were really on a roll and we're really against this, and it's kind of arbitrary. So that's why I was in favor of it. I think it eliminates a lot of potential misconception, misperception, transparency. But I'm obviously very happy with the way the commission has been working, and I guess we've closed the issue. And I also agree with Commissioner Levy that perhaps in the future, the staff could perhaps bring elements of this back, and we could incorporate it maybe into what we do habitually at every meeting. For example, I was hearing that maybe staff would like to have the chair ask maybe every single time, just so that and I'm guessing here, but I can see that the perception of the public might be, if it doesn't happen every time, oh, well, you're letting the staff answer this time, and I don't think that's part of the protocol. I imagine that there's probably a lot of people out there that would see it that way. So like I said, I don't think there's a lot of substance in here, but perhaps we would want to consider as a commission having staff have that chance to comment afterwards on a non-random basis, like a habitual basis. And I'd be curious as to what your opinion
is on that.
Well, we have a motion on the floor. We need to second it and figure out whether
Well-
we go to discussion.
We do?
Yeah. Made a motion. Alan made a
Oh.
motion.
Oh, you did?
It started out as a motion with commentary to follow. So my motion would be to just stay with status quo, what we have been doing. And if we have to make a tweak on a particular issue from time to time, then we do that. But let's not change the whole.
I'll second that motion then.
I totally get the reasons for that, but since we are kind of talking about technical and procedural matters, is that really a motion? I mean, if don't motions only apply to an action? And can you have a motion to just not change anything?
Again, the motion would just be to deny the,
Or-
deny the, if that's how you
Yeah.
want to put it.
Well, or
Let's ask
but maybe sorry, if I could just, I just had a thought. Maybe the motion could be to articulate the commission's view that the status quo works. And maybe that would then be an action, or to pass that along to the supervisors or something like that.
Let's ask the director what language we would need to not recommend action on this.
I think that would be fine, but I would ask that you include within that motion and to recommend that procedures or rules not be adopted.
I think, I would say, what we're saying is these rules not adopted, because we have the 1998 Planning Commission handbook, so it's these new rules or modifications thereof that we're not saying, that we're saying is not necessary.
Sure? If that's the motion.
Yeah.
So the motion is that we are not accepting the new rules and staying with what is currently our rules.
So could I ask you to do one thing to make it a little bit more specific so I can do a little bit of research and go directly to the 1998 handbook and stick with that so that we can go back and look to make sure that that was actually adopted? And if it was adopted, then we need no further action. If it wasn't adopted, we will bring that back. Is that fair?
That's fair.
So you're including the language about the 1998 Humboldt County Planning Commission handbook?
Yes, that's what we're staying with.
I will second.
It's just a question here, though. Director Ford, are you suggesting that you would like to be able to do that research before we make the motion that Commissioner, no, okay,
The way the motion is stated allows us to do that.
got it.
I've got a little discussion on the motion, because what we have before us is an action item. And this action item says either recommend to the Board of Supervisors that this get officially enacted, or the alternative to that is that we recommend no action on this. And I think for clarity purposes, we need to say either act on it or we recommend no action on it. And then if there is a reason to do something different at a later date, then that could be brought before us. But I think the motion needs to be, from the consensus that I'm hearing here tonight, which I believe is that no action, we recommend no action on this to the board. That way it's clear and it's concise. Does that make sense? So with that, I would ask perhaps if the maker of the motion and the second, if they would entertain modifying it for clarity purposes.
Take number 3. I'm going to make a motion that no action be taken on this matter.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Is everyone clear on the motion?
Yes, and if I can just say, I appreciate your suggestion because I had a slight concern about referencing the 1998 rules. To be perfectly honest, I don't recall ever seeing them. I don't know that they were given to me. I'm now curious to have a chance to look at them. I think, as you said, the motion that Commissioner Bongio has now made is the clearest and most appropriate for this action item.
I did receive them on a CD, and after a week of finding a CD player, I was able to access them.
I've
So
got
they
an
do
old
exist.
laptop.
Okay, motion and a second. Are we ready for the question? Yes. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
No.
The motion passes 4-1. And with that, we will move along to hopefully the last item on the agenda, which is correspondence from Anna Hamilton. And so if staff could give us a summary of the Anna Hamilton correspondence, please.
I think this is a letter that was directed to the Planning Commission out of a concern for protection of the Mad River watershed. And as you recall, there is a general plan policy to establish some watershed protection requirements as part of the general plan implementation. I don't know that it was originally considered, the Mad River watershed was originally considered for that, but there is growing discussion. This comes out of concern being expressed by the Water Management District, and so this is a communication to the Planning Commission to let you know that there is concern for protecting the Mad River watershed.
I think that was, if I remember right, Suzanne sent that to us, as I remember, I think getting it in email, so we have seen that. I have seen that. I hope the rest of the commission have seen it also. Any other items, Director or Commissioners, before we adjourn?
I have no other items. It does occur to me it's been a while since we've talked about the status of permit approvals, and I can give you a more thorough report, but since I did look at the number of cannabis permits approved to date today, as of today, we had 444 approved, plus the zoning administrator approved 5 today, and then the Planning Commission approved 3 more tonight. So that would be 452 if my math is correct.
And since you were looking, do you have any idea what the backlog is?
We have approximately 2,200 applications total, so we probably have 1,800 that are still in queue. One of the things that we're doing is we're going through and evaluating applications and sorting out those that have interim permits but are not making progress and moving forward. And those we intend, the larger, more egregious ones, especially those that are still cultivating even without state licenses and not moving forward, we will be bringing those forward to the Planning Commission for action. Those that have just been fallow, then the second priority is there's a group of about 500 that have just done virtually nothing. And so we need to take some action on those to close those out.
Didn't you send letters on those at one time?
We've sent letters to them, and then we've probably sent at least 3 letters to them. By now, the last letter gave them 30 days to respond, and many of them haven't responded.
Have not?
Have not.
Okay.
And so we're balancing right now between wanting to continue to devote staff resources, that anytime an application is ready to go, we're not the ones holding it up. We're bringing them forward. And so we don't want to devote too much attention to that, to the exclusion of processing permits, but to the extent that we're at a place where there's just not a lot of there aren't permits that are ready to move forward, that those will be things that we work on.
Mike?
Question then. So by letting those that are not moving forward linger, is that allowing them to have some protection under the sheriff, so that they're not getting busted?
So
I want to put it right out there.
that's a great question. So if the concern is that there are people out there with interim permits that are not making progress. And so if they're just using the interim permit as a way to prolong their ability to cultivate in the illegal or illicit market, then those are the priority sites that we want to address.
Where does Cannabis Control Bureau, what are their names, fit into that?
So the Bureau of Cannabis Control, there's three different state agencies. There's Bureau of Cannabis Control. They really regulate the manufacturing, distribution, and dispensary folks. And then there's California Department of Food and Agriculture that permit or license the cultivators. And so, for instance, today we ran into some that had their interim permit, but they don't have a state license. So we're going to be talking to them about, where are they at? Are they working with the state to move it forward? And they're not small. And so at this particular point, they may have a state or a local interim permit, but they have no ability to sell in the legal market.
What is the state concerned about these interim permits that aren't being very active in pursuing?
I think they are. They frankly have limited people power. And so one of the things that I think that they have recognized is that we've been pretty proactive about addressing illicit, illegal cultivation sites, and they absolutely want to work with us and will. But one of the things we hope to do is be able to take care of Humboldt County and keep the enforcement action there current. And the sheriff is obviously out there doing incredible work also.
Any other questions, comments by commissioners?
I have just one note. The Coastal Commission next week is going to take action on our dispensary ordinance in the coastal zone and on our personal use ordinance, which was passed by the Board of Supervisors long ago. And then finally, the CCLUO, the cannabis cultivation and distribution, manufacturing regulations. Those were approved by the Coastal Commission with modifications, and those modifications were approved by the Board of Supervisors, and they go back to the Commission this next week for final certification. So those will be going into effect in a couple of weeks locally.
Thank you. Is that it?
Congratulations on getting those through.
And our next meeting is on
August 22nd.
August 22nd will be the next meeting. And with that, we'll adjourn the August 1st meeting of the Humboldt County Planning Commission.